When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people.
Everything has been leading up to this. The religious elite have long had enough of Jesus. The Romans certainly don't want a wannabe king roaming around. So now the chief priests and the elders of the people get together. Unlikely colleagues, frenemies of sorts, they conspire with a common cause: Jesus' demise. Now is the time to strike. Now is the time to act. So they go to set the trap. They go to the high priest's place, Caiaphas' palace. They go to scheme with the intention to arrest Jesus, to have him killed. They want Jesus to lose his life. But of course, they're not willing to put their own lives on the line. They need to be careful. They need to be crafty. For the Passover is coming. The place will be packed with people. It will be bustling to the brim. Where there's a crowd, there's the potential for things to get out of hand. See, despite all their conspiring against Jesus, despite the cackle of convenient frenemies that have formed, they're not fools. They're not being impetuous or reactive. This is shrewdly staged, intentional cooperation, meticulously mapped out. They know that Jesus has plenty of supporters, and they know that Jerusalem will be packed with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims for the Passover. Two ingredients that spell potential for riot and revolt. The last thing they want to be is at risk. The last thing they want is for their plans to be thwarted or for the Romans to lose their nerve. They want Jesus to go quietly so that he can be permanently silenced. So they will take him under the cover of darkness. But here's the thing. Jesus knows that this is his path. He's long warned his disciples of the path he must tread. Even just now, he's told them the Passover is 2 days away, and of course that's no surprise to them, but here is the kicker. And the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. The Passover and the crucifixion, these two events come colliding together in the very purposes of God. For whilst the agenda of some was to kill him along with his kingly claims, it is through his death that the agenda of his kingdom will be established. He won't seek to evade the darkness, but he will go to the cross and take the darkness on. The trap is set, but God's purposes will prevail.
While Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. "Why this waste?" they asked. "This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor." Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly, I tell you, Wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal and took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," Peter said, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, "Not everyone was clean."
You couldn't get two more different, disparate responses to Jesus. Judas, here named, one of Jesus' disciples no less, cowardly betrays his master for some cash. Whilst an anonymous woman with almost no status courageously anoints Jesus at great cost. Matthew really wants us to be sure that we remember who Judas is. He's one of the 12, Jesus' inner circle. Crowds surrounded Jesus and sought him out, but the 12, these are the ones who Jesus invited to follow him. Judas was invited to follow Jesus, to lay his life down for Jesus. But Judas now seeks to ensure his master's downfall. The religious leaders, of course, have just been plotting and planning for Jesus' death. They've had quite the dilemma, quite the quandary, as to how they could arrest Jesus without causing a fuss or a fiasco. But then the solution to their problem walks in the door. What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? C.S. Lewis described it as the act of most diabolic villainy in all history. It's one thing when a stranger or an acquaintance betrays you, but this is an intimate friend. Of course, there's been no short of speculation as to why Judas did it. A calculated provocation to force Jesus to fight. A hopeless response to where he thought Jesus' mission was headed. A heartless act of greed by one who couldn't escape the grip of money. Whatever the case, all we know is that he was tempted and he took the bait. We can kind of think, I'm so thankful that I'm not like Judas. But later in the meal, when Jesus says that one will betray him, the rest of the disciples don't all pipe up saying, "It'll be Judas for sure." No, they had no idea. Judas just looked like the rest. It could have been anyone. Judas took the money and waited, actively watched for an opportune time. But whilst Judas greedily betrayed Jesus until death, the woman generously prepares Jesus for his death. The alabaster jar of perfume would have been worth a small fortune. And as she entered the room and as it is poured out on Jesus, it would have made quite the scene. The disciples are outraged. Who is this woman? What a waste. But she somehow sees with a clarity that this is perfectly fitting for the king. She is anointing the anointed one. Not for military victory, but anointing him for a victorious death. Jesus said, "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. She did it to prepare me for burial. Wherever the gospel is preached, what she has done will be also told." This wasn't waste. It was wonderful. If you want to be like the woman and not like Judas, this is what it looks like. It's extraordinary that even when the disciples don't get it, the woman somehow does. It's extraordinary that even before Jesus lovingly kneels and washes the disciples' feet, she pours out her love, preparing him for the greatest act of love the world will ever know. Jesus isn't the means to get what we want. He's the one who is worthy of our all. She poured out everything she had because Jesus was about to pour out his everything for us. He was about to do what we possibly cannot do. He was about to bring us back into relationship with God, even though we have betrayed him, even though we have turned away, even though we have sought our gain over his glory. His death is not a failure, but the very means through which we're made clean. When we see that the love that Jesus pours out, along with the life and forgiveness that he brings, the only possible response that makes sense is to pour out our all for him. In a moment, there's going to be some time and opportunity while some music plays. I really encourage you to use that time and space for prayer and quiet reflection, particularly casting your mind back to that night, some 2,000 years ago, as Jesus prepared to pour out his life for us, as he shared that meal with his friends, that there's the opportunity that if you wish to, you can come forward and have one of your feet washed or your hands washed. And as we do that, we remember with great gratitude our great servant king, the one who's poured out his all and given up his all for us.
While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
very early on in Christianity, the cross became the defining symbol of the faith. The cross quickly was associated with Christianity along with those who followed Jesus. Now, on the surface, it's so peculiar. It's really so strange. A cross of all things. It's an instrument of execution, of torture. That's hardly inspirational. Jesus didn't enjoy a long life, wasn't showered with accolades, or decorated for military success, but he was crucified at the age of 33 on a Roman cross, and Christians have celebrated it ever since. Is this just some sort of desperate attempt at spinning a really bad situation? Some say it's a joke. Others, like Christopher Hitchens, say it's morally obscene. In the ancient world, nothing looked more like failure than your leader being crucified. In fact, that was part of the very purpose, the very point of crucifixion. Yet not only did Jesus knowingly go to the cross, and not only did he willingly go, but we know why he did, of why it was significant and why it was necessary, because he explained it. He explained it to his disciples the night before he died. In fact, he even gave them, and he gave us, a meal so that we would never forget. It's because Jesus explained it to them that they could later make sense of all that unfolded. It's only because Jesus explained it to them that the cross became a victory, a symbol of victory, rather than defeat. On the night that Jesus gathered, the disciples must have already had a hunch that something was up, or at least something was different. Jesus had given them a series of instructions on how to prepare for the Passover, and he'd been warning them that his time had almost come. Maybe they just hadn't understood, or perhaps the thought was just too much for them to bear. Whatever the case, it's about to get real. The Passover had been celebrated for over 1,400 years by the Jewish people. It was a visceral and delectable reminder of God's rescue of his people out of Egypt, from the clutches of slavery of an evil and oppressive Pharaoh. On that night, all those centuries ago, they had sacrificed a lamb and spread some of its blood on their doorways. The image was one of trust that as God's judgment passed over that land, that they would be spared. As they put their faith in God through the sacrifice that had been provided. God hadn't just given them words to remember, but a meal to remember it by. From one generation to the next, year after year, God's rescue, his great rescue, was to be remembered. That's why the disciples were sharing a meal that night, or at least that's why they thought they'd be sharing a meal. All the elements of the Passover would have been there: the food to be eaten, the psalms to be sung, the words to be recounted. But as they share the Passover, Jesus does something almost inconceivable. He mixes things up. He changes the words, but not by accident, but on purpose. He takes the words of what was so familiar and he makes them about himself. Instead of this meal looking back to what God had done, he said that this meal pointed to him and looked forward to what he was about to do. He said, "This bread, it's my body that is broken for you. This wine, it's my blood that is poured out for you." Jesus is the ultimate lamb. Here's the ultimate sacrifice. The time of a new covenant has come. It's through my death, he says. It's through my death that a whole new way of being in relationship with God has been broken open. Yes, God rescued his people out of economic and political slavery in the past, but through Jesus, he's about to rescue all from slavery to sin and death. It's the ultimate rescue from the ultimate tyranny. For it is in my death that I am becoming the sacrifice for all sin. That it is in my death that I am once and for all breaking the stranglehold of death. That's why the cross is central. Every time we eat the bread and drink the wine, it's edible good news. We recall with sorrow for our sin that put Jesus there, but we rejoice that it's through Jesus' death that we are set free. It reminds us that Jesus took the judgment that we deserve. It reminds us that Jesus alone is worthy to be called Lord. It reminds us that Jesus will one day return, and his kingdom, well, it will last forever.
Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, where he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done."
Now the time is drawing very near. Jesus knows what is ahead. Jesus knows that it's not just his life on the line, but the salvation of the world. He's full of sorrow. He's troubled to the core, right to the point of death. Of course he is. Yes, he is the Son of God, but he's also fully human. He's not only about to face death, but he's about to carry the judgment for all sin and every evil on himself. So he asks some of his disciples to watch and pray, but they keep falling asleep. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" They need to watch and pray so that they do not fall into temptation. There is so much ahead of them. But this next step, well, Jesus must walk it alone. So he prays. He falls with his face to the ground and prays, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." This cup is his fate. This cup is the symbol of God's justice. He's not trying to wriggle his way out of what is ahead. He's not trying to avoid what is before him, but he's wrestling with the weight of it. He's beginning to get a taste of the judgment that he will face for us. But he longs for the Father's will alone. "Yet not as I will, but as you will." We shouldn't assume for a moment that this was easy for Jesus. This isn't God masquerading as a human. This isn't just a mere symbolic death that he faces. This isn't some mere metaphor for the carrying of sin. he will carry it all and he will really die. He will be separated from the Father in a way like he's never been before. Not because of his wrongdoing, but on our behalf. He prays a second time and a third time, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." Jesus knows that there is no other way. Unlike the first Adam, who in the garden sought their will over God's will, in this garden, Jesus, the new Adam, will not fall into temptation to abandon God's will, but will follow God's will right through the bitter end. He will drink the cup. He will pour out his life. And through his death, will give birth to a whole new humanity. Watch and pray. Looking back to what Jesus has done for us. Looking today to our Lord with love. Looking forward to that day when he will return. Watch and pray. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer."